In the fall of 1994, the small town of Fairdale, Nebraska, was the kind of place where nothing ever truly changed. The diner still served burnt coffee that tasted faintly of metal and memory. Kids still raced their bikes down Main Street with their shoelaces flapping like white flags. The grain elevator wore its coat of dust like a badge. Life had a rhythm everyone thought would last forever. Church on Sundays, football on Fridays, and gossip any day the wind bothered to blow. If you were a stranger driving through, you'd swear nothing in Fairdale had ever been new. The marquee on the single-screen theater still promised a double feature that had ended 6 weeks before. The pharmacy's bell clattered like old bones whenever the door opened. People waved with 2 fingers lifted off steering wheels. They said "mornin'" with the soft, flattened vowels of a place too far from the coasts to be hurried by anyone else's clock. And then a dog chose a circle of rusted iron in the middle of Maple and 3rd and made it the center of the world. He was a golden retriever, the color of honey left in sun, with a limp in his right foreleg that made his gait look like a careful apology. He had no collar, no tags. He belonged to everyone and no one. Folks called him Buddy without remembering who said it first, the way people in small towns name storms and secrets. He had slept behind the diner's grease-stained dumpster through summers, tucking himself in the narrow rectangle of shade that formed at noon. He had trotted behind children like a second shadow and laid his head on the boots of farmers who sat, exhausted, on the curb after harvest. He knew every porch and every hand that would sneak him a strip of bacon. In early October, Buddy stopped wandering. He rose at dawn, shook the sleep off like rain, and limped to a particular manhole carved with a pattern of concentric rings and a city stamp so worn no one could read it anymore. He sat. He pointed his ears toward the darkness. He did not sleep there. He kept watch. Morning, afternoon, night, like a monk keeping a private hour of prayer. It would have been easy to chalk it up to age. Old dogs get strange. But if you stood close and met his eyes, you felt a weight you couldn't laugh off. He wasn't curious. He was waiting. Waiting is a simple word that does complex work. It can hold hope like a lantern, or grief like a stone. In Buddy's gaze, waiting was all stone. At first, people joked. "Guardin' the city's smell," said Earl from the service station, holding his belly when he laughed. The kids on bikes gave Buddy a berth, not out of fear, but respect for a ritual they didn't understand. By the end of the first week, the jokes thinned. By the second, they died altogether. The air around that manhole felt strange, like the few degrees of chill that settle when a cloud passes over the sun. On a fog-heavy morning, a woman carrying a bag of groceries paused. "You okay, old boy?" she asked, because people ask animals questions they can't bear to ask each other. Buddy's ears twitched, but he didn't look away. The woman swore. Later she heard a sound come up from the iron. Soft, fragmented, too fragile to be a cry, and too shaped to be churned water. She set her bag down on the curb and put her palm on cold steel, the way you might touch a friend's forehead. The fog beaded on her hair. After a minute, she picked up the groceries and walked away fast, blinking hard. By Halloween, children cut diagonals around the manhole, as if it cast a shadow wider than itself. Adults went the long way without saying why. Those who forgot, who strolled past on the old autopilot of habit, found their breath snag for no good reason and hurried on. Nothing in the town had changed but the direction of people's feet. Buddy did not budge. The day the lid came up started like any other. A low ceiling of clouds, the smell of snow practicing in the air. But it turned on a boy too restless to stand the town's hush. Mason Carter was 12 and all elbows. He kept a crowbar under his bed because he collected things that might be useful when the useful moment arrived. He had a face too old for his years and a smile too quick for his face. Life had taught him to jump first and laugh after. His mother, Luan, worked the early shift at the diner, and the late shift too when the tips were bad. His father existed mostly in stories Mason no longer asked to be told. Mason had been watching Buddy for weeks. He biked by before school and after, hovering at the curb with a foot down, his front tire turning tiny black arcs on the street. He would have sworn under oath that there was a message in the set of Buddy's ears, in the way he leaned ever so slightly toward the iron, in the way his breath slowed when the street fell quiet. He wanted to be the kind of person who knew how to hear it. On the first Friday of November, he slid the crowbar from his backpack and settled the teeth into the seam. "This is stupid," he told himself, which is often the last thing you say before you do something brave. He pushed down. Metal groaned in the way old men do when they stand up. Rust powdered under the bar like cinnamon. He widened his grip and pulled. The lid lifted a half-inch, and then an inch, and then air from below rolled up in a damp exhale that smelled of winter kept in a basement. The hair on Mason's arms rose. He would remember the next sound for the rest of his life, not as something he heard so much as something that rearranged the air inside his head. A whimper, not a baby's or a person's, a dog's, faint as a thread. "Alive!" Buddy barked. Once. Not loudly, not to alarm. It sounded like relief spoken out loud for the first time in a long time. "You see, I told you." Mason dropped to his belly without thinking and pressed his face to the opening. The round of darkness wasn't pure. It had texture, brick walls that sweated moisture, a black ribbon of slow water, a cross-hatching of shadow, and then, in the penumbra, 2 eyes reflecting the gray light like coins. They were too big in a face too thin. He scrambled backward, hard a bird. "There's a dog down there," he shouted, voice cracking, voice carrying. Fairdale's gift and curse was how fast news traveled when there was nowhere else to go. People came from doorways and alleys as if they'd been waiting to be told to come, like a town is sometimes one body. "Call Walt," someone said, because Walter Griggs had the number for the county's maintenance crew, because Walter knew about lines and tunnels and the veins under the town, because Walter knew other things too and had built a life on not knowing them. Walter lived on the edge of Fairdale, where the town gave up and let the fields resume their slow argument with the sky. He'd spent years in a house that looked like a man holding his breath. If you asked, folks would say he kept to himself, which is both description and kindness in places like this. He had a limp that told its own story, and a face that did not like being read. He arrived carrying a photograph. He had pulled it from the drawer where he kept the things he had promised never to look at again. In it were 2 golden retrievers, their fur the exact shade of late wheat. One had a thin white stripe down his nose, and one did not. They leaned together so naturally, you might have thought the photographer had placed them that way, except anyone who has ever loved 2 living things knows the world arranges such grace on its own. On the back, in block letters, it said, "Buddy and Max, 90. Walter's mouth was dry when he said, "They were mine." He added, "Because it seemed important to tell a story about yourself where you get cast as the villain before anyone else can." Max ran off. That's what I told myself. That's what I told everyone. What he didn't say was that there had been a storm that year, 1991, and it had cut the town into pieces, power out, fences down, water where it didn't belong, a creek swollen into a river mean enough to move a truck. He'd lost the roof over his garage and the map in his head that told him where to put his anger. He had lost his wife a year earlier to a cancer that ate quietly. The house had shrunk around him after that. Max had been skittish since the sirens. There had been the crash of a fallen elm, a door left ajar, a flash of fur, a man's voice yelling and then swallowing itself, because you can only call into the storm so long before you learn it won't answer. Buddy had come back the next morning, nails clacking on the linoleum like a knock. Max had not. Walter had stood in the yard with a leash in his fist and a prayer he didn't believe in. He looked down at the leash. He put it away. The town did not forgive him for the leash, or for the drawer with the photograph, or for his admission arriving 3 years and a dog too late. But under their anger, they recognized themselves. They had walked past Buddy 100 times and had not stopped. The fire department arrived with ropes and a harness and the brisk efficiency of people who, for once, could save something. They worked quick because some jobs get heavier the longer you plan them. Men who had known each other since they were boys lifted their eyes to meet without speaking and found in each other's faces a relief reckless enough to hurt. They lowered a light into the hole and found not open space, but a narrow run of brick where a storm drain met the old sewer. There was a pocket where silt and stone had built a shelf the size of a blanket folded wrong. On it lay the dog. His ribs made a comb of shadows. His fur was matted with silt and a winter of damp. He tried to stand, and his legs shook like grass. He didn't growl when the light hit him. He closed his eyes, which is a kind of trust. "Easy, boy," a firefighter murmured, because people talk to animals when they need to believe the world hears them. They swung the harness down. The dog scooted, the way a body moves that still wants to please. He got a paw in. He skittered. A brick in the wall, long ago eaten to the thickness of bread, chose that moment to shear. It fell and took others with it. The shelf juddered. The pocket shortened by an inch, then 2. Water, slow and black, swirled and climbed, bickering with the debris. The hush on the street broke into voices cut short, like film spliced wrong. "Get him out!" someone cried. Walter turned away, palm over his mouth like a man who knows exactly which second his life went wrong. Mason didn't think. He went to his stomach again, hands on the rope so tight his knuckles flashed. "Pull now!" he yelled at no one and everyone. A firefighter met his eyes and made a call that would cost him a lecture later and maybe a reprimand. He hauled. Max, because the town knew it was Max before anyone said the name, scrabbled with every inch of his body, front paws digging against air. The harness slid. He slipped and then caught again, nails catching on a chipped brick that gave him half a second of purchase, and then nothing at all. The rope bit into palms. Mud and foul water came up in angry splatters. The manhole rim, slick with damp, was no friend to any of them. Inch by mean inch, the animal rose. When his head reached the mouth of the hole, the street went quiet in a way that wasn't silent so much as the town remembering how to breathe. Hands that had hammered nails and carried caskets and picked up sleeping children reached down. Not gifters, but receivers. They lifted Max as if he were both heavy and holy. But he stood. He had been still for so long that his standing felt like a siren. He stepped forward, so carefully he might have been crossing a field of glass, and put his nose to Max's. Touched once, touched again. Then he lay down with his nose against Max's ribs like a stethoscope, as if to count them back to the number they ought to be. There were tears. People hid them badly. A woman made the sound you make when a story you told yourself too long finally falls apart. Walter did not move closer. He worked his mouth around the word sorry, like it had thorns. It lodged in his throat and stayed there. They took Max to Dr. Delaney, who had a veterinary practice behind the feed store and hands that steadied when animals were afraid. The clinic had the papery smell of antiseptic and old magazines. Buddy followed the gurney and planted himself at the foot of whatever made a bed under a heat lamp. When the assistant tried to usher him away with gentle fingers, Buddy lifted his eyebrows, just his eyebrows, and became a wall. "Let him stay," Dr. Delaney said, and no one argued. The town went home and didn't. It went to phones and didn't know what to say. It went to prayers it hadn't prayed since it was a different kind of place. Luann poured coffee past closing for people who didn't want to sleep, while Mason sat on a counter he wasn't supposed to sit on, elbows on knees, talking fast because if he stopped, he might feel something he wasn't ready to feel. He told and retold the moment the rope bit and the dog rose, adding nothing and leaving out nothing, which is the mark of a story trying to correct the universe. The jar next to the register, tips scrawled in marker, filled with bills that said VET on them instead. People dropped in quarters and guilt and promises to do better. Fairdale did something else. It didn't do much. It gathered the next evening without a funeral or football game. The mayor, whose word meant sends letters and shows up in disasters, stood on the steps of the post office and squinted at a handwritten speech because someone told him he ought to mark the day. He cleared his throat and said thank you to the fire department and to Dr. Delaney and to the boy who'd ignored signs that didn't exist yet. He tried to say the town had learned a lesson and stopped because he didn't have the right words to get himself across the creek between embarrassment and confession. It turned out he didn't need to. People know when a man stands honestly on the wrong side of the creek. Mason didn't feel like a hero. Heroes were in books and on movie posters curled behind the theater's dusty glass. He felt like a kid who had done something he would have done whether anyone looked or not. He went to the clinic door and pressed his forehead to the smudged window because he needed to see the rise and fall of Max's chest. It rose. It fell. He went home and dreamed of brick and water and ropes that slipped and held. Walter Griggs walked to the manhole by himself at midnight because some things must be done alone if they are to count. The lid was back in place, seated like a seal over a confession. He sat on the curb with his hands steepled, because there's something about steepling hands that looks like prayer even when it isn't one. He thought of the day the elm fell, of the leash hanging empty like a throat, of the way Buddy had laid his head in his lap that night and accepted whatever he had to give, which had not been enough. He said, not loudly, to the cold air, "I didn't look." The words laid themselves down in front of him like boards over a ditch. He crossed them by speaking them again. In the morning, someone found him still sitting there, eyelids rimed like the grass. When they asked if he was okay, he said, "No," and then, "I will be," which is the most honest answer a person can give when told to fit himself into a shape called fine. Week by week, Max returned to the weight a dog needs to do dog things. His fur lost its slick of tunnel and took back its sun. He walked a little bit like he'd kept a piece of the underground with him, his steps careful, as if measuring the world before trusting it. Buddy trotted at his side with a proprietary air, as if reintroducing a friend to the town. This is the diner. This is where the kids drop popcorn. This is the tree with the good smells. This is the woman who cries into her scarf sometimes, but smiles when you lay your head on her knees. When the first snow finally committed, none of the practice flurries but the true soft siege, Buddy and Max carved twin troughs in the new white as they moved. People took photographs. They pretended it was for the dogs, and it was, but it was also for themselves, because sometimes you take a picture to prove to your future self you did not imagine the good thing. A week before Christmas, a brass plaque appeared beside the manhole, affixed to a post someone scavenged from a fence line. No one claimed credit. The engraving read, "For the one who waited, for the one who was found, for the ones who promised to listen." Children pressed their mittened hands over the letters to feel the words like braille. Teenagers, who are constitutionally allergic to reverence, touched it quick when no one was looking. Old men stood with their hands behind their backs and nodded like someone had finally said out loud something they'd been mumbling for years. At the dedication, such as it was, because in small towns dedications are largely an excuse to feed each other, mugs of cocoa steamed and cinnamon slalomed out of Luann's portable urn. The mayor cleared his throat again, but this time said only, "We'll try to pay better attention." People clapped, not as if the line was good, but because the intention was. Walter came and did not stand in the crowd. He hovered at the edge like weather. He held the photograph in both hands. He had brought it to offer to whoever kept records of things. Maybe the library, maybe the lady who ran the historical society, out of a room that smelled like maps. He did not get that far. Mason saw him first. The boy's face did a dozen things in a second: anger, amazement, pity, courage, like weather over a lake. He walked straight to Walter, whose shoulders went up and then down, as if bracing for a blow that turned out to be a hand extended, empty. "You should come meet him," Mason said, and the pronunciation of him made it obvious who he meant. "It is easier to move a mountain you have named." Walter followed the boy, his boots writing letters in the snow. Buddy watched their approach and flicked an ear in the universal language for "it's about time." Max pushed his nose into Walter's thigh, because animals forgive in a way that is either holy or foolish, and therefore indistinguishable. Walter sat on the curb, hard, because his legs didn't want to hold him up, and because the curb had become, by use and need, a kind of altar. He pressed his brow to Max's head and did not cry loudly. People made a circle around him by looking elsewhere and giving him a privacy no one had to declare. By spring, the story had done what stories do when they belong to everyone. It overstayed in some versions and starved in others. Some swore Buddy had not moved for entire days, which wasn't true. He ate and he slept and he warmed his bones in the sun, but it captured a more important truth. Constancy has its own heroism. Some said Max had bitten the hands that pulled him, which he had not. He had licked a knuckle, tentative, because it's hard for people to let go of the idea that rescue is always a struggle. And yet the core held. A dog had kept vigil. A boy had disobeyed the right way. A town had chosen not to look away a second time. Mason found that adults smiled at him in a new way that had more weight in it. It made him uncomfortable and proud. It made him sit up straighter in school for a while, and then slump again because algebra did not care about dogs or manholes. He took a job sweeping the diner on Saturdays, which meant he pocketed stories the way other kids pocketed coins. He'd catch himself passing by the plaque on purpose, as if a sentence in brass could steady him on days when his father's absence felt like weather even indoors. Buddy and Max aged the way good dogs do, with a kind of dignity that makes you forget to resent time. They were in the park when toddlers learned to keep their feet, and at the edge of Little League when boys, taller now, hooked fingers in chain link and yelled until their throats rasped. They were the backdrop at first dates and the excuse for conversations people weren't brave enough to start otherwise. They lay on porches that had not felt like thresholds for years and made them thresholds again. Nothing lasts forever, not even in Fairdale. When Buddy's limp got worse and his world shrank to mornings and afternoons with longer naps between, the town pretended not to see until it was safe to see. They brought softer beds and leftovers trimmed smaller. When the day came when he did not rise to meet the sun, Max laid his head where Buddy's ribs used to lift and made a sound low in his throat that said, "Both stay and go." Dr. Delaney came to the shady patch behind the diner because some endings deserved to be written where they began. The town said goodbye the way it had learned to do everything else, together, awkwardly, with casseroles and too many hands offering to help carry the same small thing. It is tempting to end here, with Buddy gone and Max sleeping in the space his body left, and call the circle closed. But stories that change towns do not end so neatly. They root. A year later, when the sirens wailed again, tornado this time, not flood, the town did not make its old mistake. People opened cellar doors twice. They checked on the old man at the end of Pine who pretended he didn't need checking on. They counted heads like school teachers. When the wind had finished acting like a god, They put the town back together in the way people who have survived something know how to do, with a grim cheerfulness that might, if you looked unkindly, be mistaken for habit. On a Tuesday in June, a little girl named Clara tugged at her mother's sleeve at the farmer's market and pointed toward a cardboard box that mewed. "We should ask," she said solemnly, which was not actually a question. Her mother had been the woman who, years ago, had set groceries on the curb and walked away from a manhole fast, trying not to cry. She knelt and helped her daughter lift out a kitten with 2 big ears. "We'll listen," the mother said, which was an answer to something larger. Mason grew. He left for a while because that is what some boys in small towns must do to find out which parts of themselves belong to the horizon and which to the street they know by heart. He came home on holidays and found Max slower but still pleased, an old soldier content with a small garrison. On the weekend before he left for college, Mason took his bike, dusted off and too small, and rode the old route down Main, past the theater's battered glass, past the service station where Earl had finally let someone else pump gas, past Luann's diner where the coffee had gotten better because she had. He coasted to a stop by the plaque. He laid his palm over the words, not to read them, but to take their temperature. It was warm from the afternoon sun. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He had learned, finally, to hear messages that didn't speak in words, and the message here was the same as it had been the day he put a crowbar under iron and taught himself how to listen to the world beneath the world. Years passed like miles on a slow road. Max died gently on a summer night when crickets were busy and no one thought to notice the air shifting from one song to another. Walter lived a while longer. He came to be the man some people went to when their apologies had nowhere to land. He would sit with them on the curb by the sealed circle of iron and say it plain. They did. He nodded. He told them about 2 dogs and a boy and the particular mercy of doing the right thing 1 minute later than you should have, and 1 minute earlier than you fear it's too late. If you drive through Fairdale now, you might miss the plaque if you aren't looking for it. The diner has a new coffee machine that doesn't burn as often. The theater still forgets to change its marquee on time. The pharmacy's bell has been oiled but insists upon clatter. You might think, if you are the sort who measures a place by its novelties, that nothing truly changes here. You'd be wrong. Change in Fairdale is quieter than that. It is a hand on a shoulder before it's asked. It is a second look where first glances used to do. It is the moment a person says, "I didn't see," and the town replies, "We do now." So I'll ask you this, and I won't dress it up. How many buddies have you walked past in your own life? Not dogs, though maybe dogs too, but the ones who wait on the edges of your attention, keeping vigil over something you don't want to see, the friend who has gone quiet in a loud room, the kid who hangs back, the old man who doesn't ask for help because he doesn't know how anymore, the griefs that don't announce themselves with sirens. Did you turn away or did you stop? The work is simple, which is not the same as easy. Pry up the lid, let the air in, listen for the breath that's still there, and when you hear it, faint, fragile, alive, do not wait for permission you don't need. Tie your hands to a rope and pull.